our next presenter, Lucy Howard from Turner Townsend. So just briefly, Lucy has spent over 2 decades working in infrastructure, and her words, loves project management. So as I said, Lucy moved to Turner Townsend in 2013, and it's great to have her joining today to discuss Project 13, which is a global movement in delivering better outcomes. So over to you, Lucy.
Thanks, Alice. And can I just check, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Brilliant. And I will just forewarn that due to some COVID isolation, I've got some kids here in the background being looked after by somebody else at the moment. So I would expect disruption on this particular project this afternoon, but we'll see how we go. So I'm Lucy Howard and I work for Turner Townsend, but I'm very much here today on behalf of Project 13, which, as you said, is a global movement in delivering better outcomes, which is backed by the ICE, by the Infrastructure Client Group and many other institutions. So really welcome this opportunity to be here with APM colleagues today to talk about it. So if we can just move on to the next slide, I'll just take you through a few of the outcomes that it would be great to get out of today. So firstly, still a networking event, so an opportunity to grow our networks with each other. I'll take you through a little bit about my career as a fellow project professional, but I'd certainly welcome people connecting with me on LinkedIn if this presentation is of particular interest to them. Secondly, I'll explain why Project 13 is so much aligned to today's agenda that you've got running for the conference. Thirdly, I'll reflect on the basics of a 4-year journey, and being a maths fan, considering we've got about 20 minutes to do that, that's a ratio of about 100,000 minutes to 1. So it will be very, very high level. But fourthly, if you do like what you hear, then it's a great opportunity to get you involved via the routes like the one that I've got shown on the screen right now, which is our Project 13 website. And I'll take you through a bit more of those details. So if just move on a slide, please. So a little bit about me. Yes, 20 years in infrastructure, started off as a civil engineer, ended up in project management. My particular background is in transport interchanges. So this is one of my first babies up on the screen here, one of the DLR stations that I was involved in. But a common theme through my career has been mobilising teams to outcomes, whether that is an outcome that we're achieving on a site, an outcome that we need to deliver for a bid, or an outcome in today's context in terms of industry improvement. So if we move on again, this is a bit more about where do I find myself currently. So my role is at Turner Townsend. They're kindly supporting my attendance today. So we're a global network in 46 countries. We work on exciting programs. I get to see some exciting trends coming across from partners across the world. Some of the issues that we're dealing with are very much the same. Social value. I'm always astounded at how similar that is as a challenge to be dealt with, with colleagues across the world. It's great for me to have been getting involved in dealing with so many colleagues across the world in my current role, having come from that senior PM with a site focus, getting some more experience on the client side, to running teams of about 600 people across the south of the UK, to going on to being a transport sector lead, a markets lead. And that's where I find myself now, looking across transport, power, utilities and defence. So you never know where that project career might take you. If we just nip on a slide, obviously I'm very conscious of talking to colleagues in the southwest at the moment. So just highlighting, that's an area of expansion for us. I've got offices in Bristol and Exeter, and you'll see from what's on the right-hand side of the screen there, really close alignment between a lot of the services that we offer and the kind of subject matter that you as an APM audience will be really interested in. So if we just move on a slide again. As I said, Project 13 is very much outcomes focused, so there's a lot of commonality between our purpose as a business, as I've got on the screen here, and what I'll go on to explain with Project 13. Certainly the common theme being outcomes, and the key message here is, I think we'd all agree it's really useful that all of our employers recognise the value of engaging with the learning processes of organisations, such as the one hosting us today, but also the ICE and the ICG that have been backing Project 13. You know, it's really good to have an employer that is behind that and on the journey with you. And that is where my Project 13 journey began on the next slide back in 2017. So to tell you a little bit about this, and I've got it titled as My Project 13 Timing is Everything. There was a call out from the ICE and the ICG for future leaders, back as I was then, because I hadn't quite turned 40, to support Project 13. They said no prior knowledge is required. My team suggested I go for it for a half-a-year stint, but unbeknownst to them at the time, in the photo on the left, I was actually a couple of months pregnant. So my key reflection is that I'm glad that I didn't talk myself out of the experience of going for getting involved in initiatives like this, because along this journey, I've certainly expanded my networks, expanded my learning. It's meant that I've launched it to industry alongside members of the Treasury, as shown in the rather blurry, apologies, photo on the top right there. But I've also had the opportunity to meet some recognisable figures from people in government, to people running the National Infrastructure Commission, to some high profile other people that feature in the media all the time, like Andy Burnham, as it's shown in one of the shots there. So it's just a word of encouragement that you never know when these things are going to go along and come along. And it is really good from, you know, somebody like my perspective, to just encourage people to get out there and grab them. The timing may not be right for you, but, you know, do get stuck in. So just turn into the next slide. And here we start to get into, why does Project 13 fit the agenda that we've had for the conference today? So a few things that I picked up from the literature that was shared with me. Organisations set up, what can organisations do to encourage the best project teams? Well, certainly Project 13's focus on enterprise delivery really gets to the heart of that. In terms of people skills, developing and leading the best project teams will take a range of new skills, was one of the observations. I'm very passionate about the role of asset owners in capable ownership and making sure that they're setting up project teams for success. And thirdly, there, technology and tools. How are we harnessing better communication and automation tools to help the project team? One of the key parts of Project 13 is digital transformation. And so I'll cover that in a bit more detail today. So very, very close alignment between the agenda. It's not just by chance that I've been asked to talk about this today. So if we just skip on another slide, please. So where did it come from, Project 13? There were actually 12 projects beforehand, so it's a lot like Apollo 13. It follows after 12, honey, as is the famous kind of Tom Hanks line out of the film. So the origins of it, many clients, both in the ICE and the infrastructure client group circles, were getting together and recognizing that they were having some common problems in terms of delivering great outcomes from the programs and the huge investment that was going through them. So the first one, just on the left-hand side here, we've got a chart of productivity growth in terms of output per worker, courtesy of McKinsey's. And this is saying that there is a substantial gap in productivity and also the rate of productivity gain between construction tracking along the bottom there and some of the other industries that we have. Now, of course, you might argue that, you know, there'll always be nuances of being out on site as opposed to in the factory. That means that there's going to be some differences, but there was a recognition that we could certainly do more to close that gap. Secondly, and this is really interesting when you're delivering this kind of talk in a lecture theatre, the second graph in the middle there has got revenue against pre-tax profit for the top 100 companies in construction at the time. And you always say, blue revenue, orange for pre-tax profit, and the people at the back of the lecture theatre can't see any orange on there. So, we really are talking about slim margins here, and particularly in the first years that these covered compared to the later years, you can see that it's gone from something like 3% to more like half that. So there was definitely a push from clients to say that we have to have sustainable margins, or else we're going to have a problem with not having the suppliers available to deliver the work. And then thirdly, there was this recognition that digital transformation, yes, we need to do something on that, but everybody facing the same challenge of trying to understand exactly what that is. So if we just move on again, please. So they came together and said, we need some solutions to this. Project professionals were certainly a solutions-based, team of people. So they identified that in Project 13, they needed an industry-led movement for high performance. They needed to shift from transactional to collaborative operating models. They needed to get some of the UK's largest infrastructure owners to absolutely get behind this as an opportunity to invest in skills and also in technologies that are going to be required to take our industry forward. And in doing so, really focused on creating a sustainable future, sustainable workforce, sustainable assets, and better value for all, particularly focused on what does better value mean for the customer. So if we just move on again, please, thank you. And here what you've got, something that really excited me as being one of those people with no prior knowledge coming into Project 13 was picking up the report that you can see on the right-hand side of the page here, titled From Transactions to Enterprises, which although it's now 4 years old, I would say is well worth a read if you haven't come across it, because it's a good kind of empowering document to make you think, yes, we absolutely need to get behind the key messages there. So what does it say? It says basically the transactional model is broken. We need to shift to an enterprise model where owners, partners, advisors, suppliers are working in an integrated and collaborative fashion based on long-term relationships and great incentivization behind that. So there's some of these themes that you'll see, carry on from things like text that I studied an awful long time ago now, it seems, that got the ball rolling, like Latham and Egan. But this really set in a current context of what's the mission statement? Why do we really need to change? And they set out 3 additional things. They said consultants at the moment struggle to acquire the knowledge required to design right. So that's tapping into things like operator and customer insights, historical information to design right. Secondly, clients discover that lowest price does not always mean best value. And thirdly, they said contractors aren't being set up right to deliver efficiency and to be able to bear the risks that we're often trying to pass down to them. So it provided a framework of key features, but it was very much, this is the mission statement, this is the aspiration, not this is the manual and the how-to of how we actually bring that about in practice. So if we move on again, please. They also set out a maturity matrix, which recognises that high-performing enterprise is a journey from simple collaboration on the left here to high-performing enterprises on the right. So it describes the levels of maturity organisations can progress through as they adopt a Project 13 approach, ultimately getting to a point where there's less reliance on the contracts that you have between them and more reliance on pooling resources and using those effectively to deliver those great outcomes. Hoping that in the case of that, you would have more focus on the customer, improved productivity and a sustainable industry push throughout that. One thing I would highlight to people is it's not a matter of start at simple and move right and move as far towards high performing enterprises, and don't stop until you get there. It's about what is going to be the most appropriate to deliver the outcomes that you need. If you're trying to deliver a simple outcome, we don't need to introduce a complex, high-performing enterprise to do that necessarily. So if we just move on again, please. And what we've got here is exploring what makes a great program become a great enterprise. And they set out 5 pillars for that. But I would kind of clarify that for me, pillars, it kind of makes you think that, all 5 are equal and you've got, a nice kind of capstone on the top of it. But in this case, I would highlight that capable owner and digital transformation, the piece that goes around the other 3 to differentiate it from what you might get by setting up a traditional alliance. And just doing that for one particular project endeavour that you're trying to do. So a commitment to Project 13 is certainly a commitment to evolve as an owner, not stand up a great programme, learn a lot about workarounds within that programme, and then let these subside. But what I'll do is I'll talk to capable owner and digital transformation more directly in a little while. Because they align so much with the agenda. But so what I'll talk about just now is briefly what are the other pillars. So governance, value needs to be defined by an owner based on the outcomes. The reward follows that. The sustainable returns follow that with clear incentives. A real key part for me is in doing that, you create an opportunity for investment with a secure pipeline. Not the what exactly is in the pipeline, but the certainty that there will be one and people are contracted for that pipeline so that they can invest accordingly. And another key point in governance for me, risk allocation is aligned with capability. And if possible, it is jointly owned. It's not a matter of how can we pass it through the different tiers in the supply chain. In terms of organisation as a pillar, that's about engaging the right capability from suppliers early and using that in high-performing collaborative teams. So it's like taking early contractor involvement up a gear, really focusing on if we know the outcome, what's the capability that we need? Therefore, what might we deliver, defined by those capable people, with those people involved right from the start. So it's not just about passing it down through tiers of a supply chain, but also looking at completely different services. So where might you adopt a technology or a timetabling solution in the case of transport, rather than building something differently? And then in the case of integration, it's all about how do you get set up in such a way that processes and information drive effective delivery. So teamwork, production management, health, safety and well-being, they go in that category there. So we can move on again to the next slide, please. And I'm not here to kind of tell you that the race is run and we're all finished and we know the answers. I always, as a Formula One fan, compare this to a Formula One race, which typically they're about 70 laps. And at the moment, we're about 4 laps into the Project 13 race. So what we are set up to do is to allow information exchange amongst all of the organisations that are adopting this, so that everybody doesn't have to learn the lessons learned in sequence independently of each other. So on this, our website, project13.info, it's a great place to go on there and see what people are doing, see the best practice that's evolving, and pick that up and think about how you can use that on your own project. So if we move on again, please. The really strong message I would like to impart with you is it's got some really strong support from across the industry. So starting at the top left, I won't go through them all, but Anglian, they've adopted Project 13 thinking on several alliances. They've got 2 going at the moment, including a strategic pipeline alliance that balances their resources across their region. Sellafield, they've got the Programme and Project Partners PPP model. They have procured an integration partner, a design and engineering partner, a civils partner, and a process partner to to give those partners the access to 20 years of sustainable employment, which is absolutely crucial for the region as part of a 100-year decommissioning programme. That one's really interesting, and I would encourage, there's information available on the government website. If you type in Sellafield and PPP, get an understanding of what's going on there. The Environment Agency, they've got the Next Generation Suppliers Arrangements that they have launched based on some work that they've done on the Thames Estuary Asset Management Programme, which is a really exciting case study that we also reference in our work. Heathrow were backing Project 13 for their expansion. Others dotted around the screen, you can see we've got people, Sydney Water, as far afield as that. We're in the Antarctic. And as well as the ICE and the ICG that backed this movement originally, there's now the World Economic Forum who picked it up and said, actually, we think this is a really promising bit of thinking, and we would like to adopt Project 13 and share that on their global platform as well. So absolutely fantastic endorsement. Just briefly, I'll just relate it back to some of those key questions that you were asking today. So on the next slide, please. Relating it back to the agenda of what can organisations do to encourage the best project team. I think, I've touched on this already, but certainly enterprise delivery. What we mean by that, I've set out in some bullets on the left here. So the role of the asset owner, the focus on the customer and the outcomes, operations being a key part of the enterprise, the ecosystem of the suppliers and getting everybody involved early, the reward based on value, not time of volume, and that risk alignment to capability. On the right-hand side, as I say, 100,000 minutes to boil down into each one today means that I'm just going to signpost you to a few of the resources that are on the website here. So if you want to think, are we an effective enterprise with the project that you're on right now? You can log on to the website, you can take the maturity matrix. You can also see some of these news articles here that put the link between each of our work streams and how that forms up a really effective enterprise. So moving on to the next slide, please. People skills, this is definitely my area of interest. I co-lead the Capable Owner work stream. We've tried to define what that looks like. Some great work by Heathrow behind this, where they looked at, and you can see on the website again, how to identify and recruit infrastructure leaders of the future. What do you need to have, both in terms of the 6 characteristics that I've laid out down the left-hand side here, but also some of those different skills that you need from different people in the team. So there's a leadership matrix on there as well that's really interesting. And then the other article that I would point you in the direction of, if you're interested in this area, is Andrew Page, my fellow member of the Capable Owner group. He has set out what are the 6 steps to being the capable owner, reflecting on the Anglian journey. And in that, he says commitment starts at the top. You have to have a sustainable commercial model. Certainly have to select the right partners, really invest in creating symbiotic relationships to develop high-performing teams, but deliberately deliver differently. So that's another piece of recommended reading for you if this is of interest. And then lastly, just onto the alignment between the work that we're doing in digital transformation and the technology and tools agenda that was shared today as well. So a nice kind of wrap-up piece for us. And one of the things that I would flag on this is, not all of us come from a digital transformation or a technology background. It's quite tempting to say, right, well, we'll put the tech team in the corner, and we'll wait for their advice. It's something that we all have to really engage with and go on that learning journey. So I'm learning on this as much as some of you may be on the call that don't come from that kind of background. But key messages, it's really about enabling people to use information to make better decisions, improve processes, and apply technology wisely, changing behaviours so that we're getting the most out of those. And how does that fit into the enterprise, both in terms of understanding what you've currently got in terms of your operational assets, and what are you going to do with them, and how is what you're going to do affect, the ultimate outcome. The interesting bit of work that I've got in the bottom there on the right is they have started doing a digital benchmarking report as part of a wider ICG activity. So that makes a really interesting read as well. And they're starting to launch that, issue that every year. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the presentation today. So if we just go on the last slide there. In terms of the outcomes, hopefully I've got across to you, we can all drive industry change. If I can do it, anybody can. How well Project 13 aligns to the other topics that you've been discussing in the conference. I've hopefully delivered some of the key points of the Project 13 enterprise, but as I say, this is the very tip of the iceberg. So you can find out more at project13.info and connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to help you navigate some of that. I hope you can feel the support from the industry that we're getting with many of the client owners that are behind this movement. And I hope that as a result of talking with you today, maybe you take time to explore and contribute, because we are on a hunt for best practice. There will be best practice out there in the projects that you're delivering. So please tip that into the discussion through that website that we have. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy. A brilliant presentation. It seemed to stay pretty quiet given your COVID lockdown situation. We've had a couple of questions come in and we've got a couple of minutes. So our first question is, Project 13 is a go, 67 laps remaining, I think referring to Formula One. When is it due for completion?
I think it's one of those things. I always talk about it's like a bid. You're never going to get to that point where it's absolutely perfect. You've got to get up the curve of evolving practice and say, right, okay, we're going to make some high impact change to begin with, and then after that, it's one of those curves where you're never quite going to get to the end. But so there's no fixed timeline for it. It is a movement to draw in best practice, and there will always be more to do. Yeah, but it's going to be decades rather than months or years. Yeah.
Great. Okay. The next question is, could you give your thoughts on how Agile PM fits with your enterprise model?
I think the best place for us to explore that is in that capable ownership area, and that aspect of what are the different skills that we're going to need to draw in to the team. And I won't profess to be an expert in Agile PM, personally, but certainly from what I picked up from the previous discussion, the previous presentation, and getting the back end of that, I think that there's a very strong alignment between the skills that were being discussed by, I think it was Barbara, and the kind of skills that we want in that capable ownership team.
Absolutely. I think that's those sort of skills and team ethos come through throughout today's sessions. Okay, we've got a chance for one more question. So what are the main successes being measured from adopting a Project 13 approach?
It depends very much on the outcomes that you've defined. So for example, Sellafield have done a lot of work on their outcomes, and so have Anglian on their strategic pipeline alliance. And although there are some similarities there, they're quite different depending on the industry that you're working in, the kind of projects that you're delivering, what you plan to do over the next 10 years. So I think it is, what we're measuring is, are you getting closer to the achievement of those outcomes? So map out what they are, and are we getting closer to it? But the difficulty is in this, of course, once you go for the enterprise approach, you don't know how close you would have been if you went another way. So it's trying to get a sense for, is it getting easier to get towards those outcomes rather than, other alternatives that you've got. But Anglian have done quite a lot of tracking over time, particularly in, being in the water sector and looking at the year-on-year efficiencies that they have to deliver. So there's some interesting statistics in the original Transactions to Enterprises report, where they are saying that the improvement in those is due to following an enterprise model. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Lucy. I think we've just about run out of time, but thank you for your presentation and joining today.
Thank you.
So thanks to those who have joined this afternoon's session. That's our last talk as part of this conference, but please do head over to the next session straight away, which is the facilitated networking discussion, where you can hear from a panel of our speakers today. Some of the conversations that were in yesterday's session were brilliant, so don't miss that opportunity. But thank you all for joining and have a good rest of your day.